you get the right for 20 years, and then other people can use that invention. So things like generics companies can come in and make that pharmaceutical composition afterwards. And so with that, prevents others from exploiting the invention. But ideally, what can you do with that monopoly right through that 20 years? You can license that right, you can sell it or commercialise in that time as well. So you don't have to keep that right all to yourself if you don't want to. So what are the requirements for a granted patent? So there's a couple of hurdles that you need to get over. So the first one is patentable subject matter. You can't just come in and get a patent granted for anything. So non-eligible subject matter include mere discoveries, ideas, theories, laws of nature. So, E equals MC squared, can't patent that. Human beings and biological processes for their generation, that's a big no-no. We don't encourage that. And then also, some of you may be familiar with the BRCA1 gene patent that went all the way to the High Court. So that's a recent decision that's quite relevant to our field in biotechnology. So that decision said that nucleic acid sequences, which convey the same information as a sequence of nucleotides in the genome of an organism, whether that be plant or animal, DNA and cDNA, is a no-go zone. There's been a few patent oppositions quite recently, 2 cases that have paved the way for people in biotechnology to kind of have a bit of wiggle room per se in this area. If anyone's interested in hearing a little bit more about that, Chris actually wrote a great article on it and we can forward that to you. So the second hurdle is novelty, so the newness of the invention. So in that you cannot disclose your invention to the public in any form. So that means sale of the invention, public use, posters, conference abstracts, sometimes grant applications because they can be published online. So that's something to be quite careful of. And just be careful. Conference abstract, you think you're just submitting it to a committee. Sometimes they actually publish it online. So please, we've had a few instances where we've got into a bit of a pickle before with those. And it's not just Australia, it's worldwide as well. And so once you've established your novelty, that's before the priority date. So once you file the patent application, anything before that is, I guess, a disclosure. So priority date is the filing date of the first, so either provisional or complete application. And the third hurdle, or main hurdle, is inventive step. This one's a bit of a trickier one to kind of grasp sometimes. So inventive step was, you need to think about whether it was obvious given what was already known in the field. So if you were the skilled person, if you were the biochemist, if you were the microbiologist, if you were the pharmaceutical composition kind of, person in the lab, if you were confronted with the exact same problem, would it have been obvious to create that invention and go down those steps and methods to make that? So if you were the skilled person confronted with the same problem, would you arrive at the same solution? If the answer is yes, then it's probably not inventive. But if you kind of stumbled onto something and you had a surprising and unexpected result, then that's where we like to see some inventiveness. The other factors that you need to consider, and this may become relevant in the case study as well, so that's something we want you to think about, is inventorship and ownership. And when it comes to licensing, you need to be very mindful that when you're going to third parties, we encourage you to have all of this sorted beforehand. There's nothing worse than going to a big pharma and them saying to you, do you have all your inventors in line? Are the applicants, are they co-applicants? Is it a single applicant? And you go, oh, well, there was this PhD student who kind of worked on this thing and we're still sorting that out. That is a big red flag. You need to have all of that sorted, everything in line before you start negotiating with Big Pharma, because it's off-putting. So an inventor, you need to think about Who is actually an inventor? It is very, very different to who is an author on a publication. The invention could not have been made in their absence. That's criteria number one. And they need to have materially contributed to the development of the invention. If they just merely worked on it because someone directed them to, okay, here's my idea, now you have to go and do experiment X, Y, and Z, that person is not an inventor who goes and does X, Y, and Z. If they just carried out a series of trials, or if they provided only financial contribution. And who is an owner? This is different to an inventor. An owner, and I guess in our field, typically it's your employer, so the university or the institute. So you're employed or paid to carry out investigative research as part of your employment duties. So when I was at the Burnett obviously owned all my IP, unless I negotiated otherwise, which is probably quite difficult. Other things that we like to consider in terms of IP, especially in our space, are pharmaceutical extensions of term. These are, I guess the government realised how difficult it was for people to get patents and get through clinical trials. And so by the time you got to that end of the 20-year period, you might have had 1 or 2 years to actually capitalise on the drug being on the market. So there was a huge push to have the patent extended, and you can actually apply for that. There are certain criteria that you need to be able to fulfil, but you can have the patent extended by up to 5 years. Not all countries adhere to this, so Australia is one of very few, including Singapore, Brunei and South Korea. So when we're talking about IP, it's not just about patents, even though that's the main game that we're all quite familiar with. In terms of licensing, you need to think about your brand. If it's a device, for example, you want to think about the logo of your company, the logo of your product, whether you have particular branding around that. Designs as well, your product shape. So if you've got like an EpiPen, for example, the shape of the EpiPen might be quite distinctive. And also copyright. And so that might come in the form of like the instruction sheet in your pharmaceutical packet of pills or whatever it is. You can get copyright for that. So that's the very, very quick overview of IP. Does anyone have any quick questions? Is everyone clear, refreshed, ready to go? Yeah, awesome. Okay, so Chris is going to talk about some analytics now.
Morning, everybody. My name's Chris, and really I wanted to quickly have give a presentation, quite a focused presentation on harnessing the power of analytics. The reason for this will become quite obvious very shortly, but I mean, you're all here because you're either heading down a commercial route or thinking about commercialising or wanting to find out more information about commercial partnerships and so forth. So there may be many reasons why you're entertaining the decision to head down that commercial path. It could be funding, it could be expectations from those above you, people you work under. So the relevance of IP is increasing, and it may be a critical factor in paving a road to commercial success. Suffice to say that strong IP protection is the end result of a careful executed IP strategy. It comes down to really the answer to this question. Do you really know the landscape within which you're working? How often do people in this room search for journal articles? Once every 2 weeks, once every week, every day? Can I get a show of hands who actually actively looks for patents? One person, 2 people. Okay. So what if I said to you 80% of technical developments only ever appear in patents? Quite a startling figure. I've referenced a journal article that actually just came out this year that goes into the history of that comment. But the reality is it's actually not too far from the truth. It depends on the area you work in, and it actually can be quite a deal higher. So in chemical sciences, for example, chemical compounds the level's around 90%. 90% of new chemical compounds only ever appears in patents. Okay, so if you're not looking at patents and you're thinking about commercialisation, you really should be. So at the end of the day, patents are a vast source of technical information, just as are journals, right? Patents can guide your research, save you from reinventing the wheel. You know, they can provide information about what technologies you might need to license along your path to commercialisation. They can enable identification of competitors, potential collaborators, commercial partners, people you don't necessarily know about from reading journal articles, right? They can allow you to monitor global technology developments, enable you to develop strategies to minimise risk and costs. You know, patenting is an expensive business. You know, making a decision to file a patent shouldn't be taken lightly. You may, you know, strategically, you may decide not to, depending on what is already out there. Knowing what's in patents that have gone before can allow you to draft focused, high-value patents. When I say high value, I mean internally, in terms of the way the document reads and the strength of the way it's written, as opposed to a financial value. Valuing patents to give a financial figure is actually quite a different thing altogether, probably a module in and of itself. And lastly, well, not lastly, there are many aspects. You know, patents, technical disclosures can assist bolstering grant applications. If you know truly what's in your field of research, you know, you're going to be in a better position. So you've probably been in a presentation like this before. I know you have. You've done the IP module, and people sometimes give you lists of databases which you can go and do searching, Google Patents, USPTO, eSpaceNet. And in those databases, you can input keywords, you know, words that are relevant to your area of research. If you're clever, you've done that extra bit of work, you probably know what patent classes are. You could probably start using those as search criteria. You could also search for companies and names of people. And really, the point of this slide is that, you know, searching is quite a technically difficult art. It's not straightforward. I can give you an example. So when I was doing my first postdoc, University of Maryland, Baltimore, I was working at the Center for Vaccine Development, and the head of the institute came to me one day and he said, I want you to look at the USPTO database of patents, and we need to design a new vaccine strain. So I was working in diarrheal diseases at that time. That is, I want you to design a new vaccine strain that is free from IP. Okay? This is around year 2000, 2002, something like that. And so Google Patents wasn't around then. And I think my first question was, no problem, what's a USPTO? You know, second question was probably, what's a patent? I had no idea. You know, I dropped in the deep end, eventually got up to speed a little bit, and I lucked out. To be honest, I lucked out, ended up finding some information that hadn't been protected. And I guess the result of that was I ended up then doing focused research, just particularly on this niche I discovered. So in the end, it's the point that, you know, studying patents can help you guide your research. But accessing patent databases on your own can be tricky. You know, data can be stored across different websites. You know, when you put in a search term, you may not necessarily get results that are completely irrelevant first. I mean, there are so many millions and millions and millions of patent documents out there, you know, 100 million plus. You know, there's a lot of information to go through. And you know, designing a search strategy, typically a good search strategy will encompass the combination of keywords, patent classes, and various other bits of information. So, you know, in knowing what I know now, and I know Renee's been in a similar position, in a similar scenario where, you know, you're sort of dumped in the deep end of trying to search for patents. In knowing what I know now, we sort of came to the conclusion, well, look, it's okay for us to give you the links to these websites, but what more could we do really to help in trying to bridge this gap between understanding, you searching and understanding patent literature? And what we've come up with is a low-cost patent search model. And it's in a trial phase at the moment because, you know, we're really trying to work out what's best for you guys. So, at the end of the day, and there's a flyer floating around somewhere which gives you a little bit of more information, but what we would like you to do is give us a summary of your research, whether that's an abstract or even a manuscript or even just in a discussion. We'll work with you to develop an optimised search strategy and provide you with a report listing the top 100 most relevant patents. Right? We're running this for free at the moment. But even still, if there was a cost, we would keep it around the $500 mark, I think. And you know, there's option for ongoing notification. So I still get my my pub crawler. Anyone sign up to pub crawler? No? Basically something that crawls PubMed to spit out journal citation. I still get that. We can do something similar. We can send you patent documents on a regular basis, weekly, monthly, whatever you like, to your email box. Okay, so really the focus of my presentation is really, you know, if you're headed down that commercialisation path and you're not looking at patents, you should be. And patents will really form the foundation of any type of negotiation and agreement that you're going to have with big pharma or any other party. All right, so now to hand over to the guest of honour. No pressure.